Get that cripple out of my sight. Zain Al-Malik's voice cut through the aquamarina like a blade, making every patron freeze mid-bite. The 32-year-old Arab billionaire pointed with disgust at the 9-year-old boy in the wheelchair. I pay $15,000 for a meal here, and I have to look at those dead legs ruining my appetite. Isabella Rodriguez felt her world collapse. Her son, Ethan, had only politely asked if he could draw the handsome gentleman at the corner table, an innocent question that had now become a nightmare. "Sir, please," Isabella whispered, her hands trembling as she tried to push Ethan's chair away. "He just wanted to—" "Wanted what?" Zain stood up, his dark eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Beg for pity with those useless legs? Turn my business dinner into a freak show?" He gestured toward the 5-star restaurant. "These people paid to dine in peace, not to see disabled people ruining the atmosphere." The restaurant was deathly silent, forks suspended mid-air, conversations frozen, everyone watching as a billionaire destroyed a child. Ethan looked up, his large brown eyes filling with tears, but his voice came out steady. "Sorry for bothering you, sir. I just thought you looked lonely and wanted to make a drawing to make you smile." The innocence of his words made Zain's cruelty even more shocking. "Lonely?" Zain laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Girl," he turned to Isabella with contempt, "teach your broken son not to intrude on the lives of superior people. Some people were born to serve, others to command, and some," he looked coldly at Ethan, "were born just to remind others what we don't want to become. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy this incredible story of secrets, redemption, and unexpected connections." The entire restaurant watched in horror as Zain continued his verbal assault. Cell phones appeared discreetly, capturing the scene. Isabella's face burned with shame and rage, but she knew she couldn't fight back. She needed this job desperately. "Manager," Zain snapped his fingers, "I want these people removed immediately. This establishment's reputation is being damaged by allowing charity cases to disturb paying customers." The manager, a nervous man in his 50s, rushed over. His face was pale with the impossible situation. Zain Al-Malik was their biggest customer, someone whose single review could destroy or elevate any business in Miami. "Mr. Al-Malik, they're not bothering anyone else, sir. Perhaps we could—" "Perhaps you could what?" Zain's voice was ice. "Choose between my business or theirs. I spend more in one night than she makes in a year. Make your choice wisely." Ethan's small hand reached into his jacket pocket, fingers clutching something precious. A letter. The letter his mother didn't know he still carried everywhere. The letter that could change everything if only he was brave enough to give it to the right person. But as Zain's cruel words continued to rain down, Ethan kept the letter hidden. This man was too mean, too angry. The letter was meant for someone kind, someone who would understand its importance. Isabella finally found her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "We're leaving," she said quietly. "Ethan, we're going home." As she wheeled Ethan toward the exit, the boy looked back one more time at the cruel billionaire. Something about Zain's eyes. They weren't just mean, they were empty, hollow, like someone who had lost something very important. The restaurant door closed behind them with finality. The ripples of this encounter were just beginning to spread across both their lives. 3 weeks after the restaurant humiliation, Isabella Rodriguez stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. The elegant script might as well have been a death sentence. Final notice: pay $3,200 or vacate within 48 hours. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. Inside their modest 2-bedroom apartment, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, carefully working on homework despite everything falling apart around them. His determination broke her heart and gave her strength simultaneously. "Mom!" Ethan looked up from his math problems. "Mrs. Peterson from downstairs said men in suits were asking about us. Are we in trouble?" Isabella forced a smile. Same brave face she'd worn since her husband died 3 years ago. "Everything's fine, mijo. Just some paperwork stuff." Nothing was fine. Losing her job at Aquamarina had created a domino effect of disaster. Without that steady income, she'd fallen behind on rent, Ethan's physical therapy, even groceries. Her other part-time jobs, cleaning office buildings at dawn, stocking shelves at night, barely covered utilities. The worst part wasn't the money. It was watching Ethan pretend he didn't notice their situation deteriorating. The way he carefully rationed his art supplies, never asking for new ones. How he'd started eating smaller portions without being asked. The quiet resignation in his eyes when she'd told him they might need to skip his therapy sessions. "I got a gold star on my essay today," Ethan announced proudly, holding up a paper. "Mrs. Johnson said I write better than kids twice my age." Isabella's throat tightened. "What did you write about, baby?" "Heroes," Ethan said simply. "I wrote about how real heroes aren't the ones with superpowers. They're the ones who keep going when everything is hard. Like you, Mom. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Here was her 9-year-old son, confined to a wheelchair, facing homelessness, and he saw her as a hero. He felt like the biggest failure in the world. Her phone buzzed. Another bill collector. He let it go to voicemail with all the others. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Ethan said quietly, his fingers fidgeting with something in his pocket. "About the letter." Before he could continue, a knock echoed through the apartment. Isabella peered through the peephole and gasped. A woman in an expensive business suit stood outside, holding a clipboard and accompanied by a man with a briefcase. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Sarah Chen from Prestige Domestic Services. We have a job opportunity that might interest you." Isabella opened the door cautiously. Sarah's smile was professional but kind. "We provide high-end cleaning services for Miami's most exclusive residences. The pay is excellent, $200 per day cash, but the clients are demanding, particular about privacy and perfection. $200 a day." Isabella's mind raced. That would solve their immediate crisis and buy time to find something permanent. "What kind of clients?" she asked warily. "Wealthy individuals who value discretion above all else. You'd work alone, usually in penthouses and private estates. No questions asked, no personal interactions with the homeowners if possible." The irony wasn't lost on Isabella. After being humiliated by Miami's elite, he was now being offered a job cleaning up after them. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. One of our most challenging clients specifically requested someone who could work around his schedule without interrupting his business." Sarah handed her a card with an address. "Penthouse level, Ocean Drive. Ask for Mr. Z." After Sarah left, Isabella stared at the address. Ocean Drive, the most expensive real estate in Miami. He'd be cleaning the home of someone who probably spent more on coffee than she made in a month. "Mom?" Ethan wheeled closer. "The letter I was trying to tell you about." "Not now, baby. Mommy needs to think about this job offer." But as Isabella held the address card, he couldn't shake the feeling that this opportunity was too convenient, too perfectly timed. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Still, what choice did she have? Ethan needed his therapy. They needed a roof over their heads. Pride was a luxury for people who had other options. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he tried again. "Mom, the letter in my pocket. I think it's important. It has a name on it and tomorrow, mijo, after I figure out how to save us." Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything they thought they knew about their lives. The elevator to the penthouse seemed to rise forever, carrying Isabella toward a fate she couldn't have imagined. Her cleaning supplies felt heavier with each floor, and her stomach churned with nervous energy. The address Sarah had given her led to the most exclusive building on Ocean Drive, the kind of place where a parking spot cost more than most people's annual salary. At 6 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors opened to reveal a private foyer with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay. Isabella had cleaned wealthy homes before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just luxury, it was a statement of power. "You must be the new cleaning service." The voice came from behind her, cold and familiar. Isabella turned around and her blood froze. Standing in a black silk robe, hair disheveled from sleep but still devastatingly handsome, was the man from the restaurant, Zain Al-Malik, the billionaire who had humiliated her son 3 weeks ago. "No," he whispered, backing toward the elevator. "This can't be happening." Zain's recognition was instant, his dark eyes narrowing with the same cruel amusement from that terrible night. Well, the universe has a twisted sense of humor." He moved closer, blocking her path to the elevator. "The woman with the crippled son, now here to clean my toilets. How appropriate." Isabella's hands clenched around her cleaning supplies. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to maintain what little dignity she had left. But the eviction notice, Ethan's medical bills, the empty refrigerator at home, they all weighed heavier than her pride. "I'll work around your schedule," she said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "You won't even know I'm here." Zain laughed, that same cold sound that had haunted her nightmares. "Oh, but I will know. I'll know that the woman who dared to judge me with her wounded martyr eyes is now scrubbing my floors. Do you see how the world really works now? Your righteous indignation doesn't pay rent, does it?" He walked to the massive windows, his silhouette outlined against the Miami skyline. "Your son, is he still drawing pictures? Still trying to make sad billionaires smile?" The mockery in his voice was razor sharp. "Leave Ethan out of this," Isabella said, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "Whatever issues you have with me, he's just a child. Issues with you? Zain turned back, eyebrows raised in false surprise. I don't have issues with servants. I simply expect them to know their place. He gestured around the penthouse. This is worth $30 million. The painting behind you cost more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes. You exist in a different universe from me. Isabella began setting up her supplies with mechanical precision, forcing herself to focus on the work rather than his words. She'd survived her husband's death, Ethan's accident, and countless other hardships. She could survive this too. But as she worked, Zain didn't leave as promised. Instead, he watched her with unsettling intensity, making phone calls in Arabic while his eyes tracked her movements. His conversations sounded heated, angry, but she couldn't understand the words. My family thinks I'm too soft, Zain said suddenly, switching back to English after ending a particularly harsh call. They believe I should have been born earlier, when the Al-Maliks ruled with iron fists instead of just iron contracts. Isabella didn't respond, focusing on cleaning his already spotless kitchen. But something in his tone had shifted slightly. Less performative cruelty, more genuine bitterness. Do you know what it's like, Zain continued, to have everything handed to you except the one thing you actually want? Despite herself, Isabella glanced up. For just a moment, Zain's mask had slipped. The emptiness she'd glimpsed that night at the restaurant was more visible now, raw and unguarded. But the moment passed quickly. His cruel smile returned as he noticed her looking. Don't mistake temporary melancholy for weakness, he said coldly. I am exactly who I appear to be. Remember that while you're cleaning up after your betters. As Isabella worked through the morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. There were family photos throughout the penthouse, but in every single one, Zain stood slightly apart from the others. And in several photos, there was an empty space beside him, as if someone had been carefully removed. Most unsettling of all, she found children's art supplies in one of the closets. Expensive ones, barely used, as if someone had bought them with great hope and then never found the right moment to give them away. When she finished and prepared to leave, Zain was waiting by the elevator with an envelope full of cash. Same time tomorrow, he said, his voice businesslike now. And bring better cleaning supplies. The ones you used today are inadequate. As the elevator descended, Isabella counted the money with shaking hands. $400, twice what Sarah had promised, enough to buy them another week in their apartment and several of Ethan's therapy sessions. She should have felt relief, but instead, a chill ran down her spine. In her experience, when cruel people were unexpectedly generous, it meant they were planning something even worse. Back at home, she found Ethan exactly where she'd left him, working on homework at the kitchen table. But now his notebook was closed, and he was holding that mysterious letter again, the one he'd been trying to tell her about. Mom, he said quietly, I really need to show you something. It's about Dad, and I think it might be about that mean man from the restaurant too. There's Titatus. That evening, Isabella finally sat down to listen to what Ethan had been trying to tell her for weeks. The letter in his small hands was worn from constant handling. The envelope yellowed with age. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the familiar handwriting on the front. For my son when he's ready to understand. Where did you get this? She whispered, taking the letter with trembling fingers. Dad left it, Ethan said quietly, before the accident. He gave it to me and said to only open it if something happened to him and you needed help. But Mum, his voice broke slightly. He also said to give it to his brother if I ever found him. Isabella's blood turned to ice. Brother? Ethan, your father didn't have a brother. He was an only child. That's what I thought too. But Mum, look at the letter. With hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the paper, Isabella opened the letter that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her late husband. My dearest Isabella and Ethan. The letter began in Marcus's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and my cowardice has finally caught up with me. There are truths I should have told you both, starting with my real name. I am not Marcus Rodriguez. I am Marcus Al-Malik, and I have a twin brother named Zain. The letter fluttered from Isabella's numb fingers. Ethan wheeled closer, his young face grave with understanding beyond his years. Mum, I think the mean man from the restaurant, I think he's my uncle. Isabella's mind reeled. Marcus Al-Malik, the man she'd loved, married and mourned, was not who she thought he was. But as the shock began to fade, pieces of a puzzle she'd never known existed started falling into place. Marcus's fluency in Arabic, which he'd claimed to have learned in college, his occasional expensive gifts that seemed beyond their means, explained away as lucky investments. The way he'd sometimes stare at news reports about Middle Eastern business dealings with strange sadness in his eyes. Most haunting of all, she remembered Marcus waking up from nightmares, calling out a name. Zain. Zain. Wait. She'd assumed it was just stress, never imagining he was calling for a brother he'd lost. She picked up the letter again, her hand steadier now, driven by desperate need to understand. I fell in love with you the moment we met at that little cafe, Marcus had written, but I knew my family would never accept you, not because you weren't worthy, but because they see love as weakness and happiness as liability. So I chose you over them. I chose our life over their world. The letter went on to explain Marcus's escape from his billionaire family, how he'd changed his name and built a new identity to protect Isabella and Ethan from the Al-Malik Empire's reach. But they found me anyway, the letter continued. My father's men tracked me down 6 months ago. They offered me money to come home and forget my American phase. When I refused, they threatened you and Ethan. That's when I knew I had to disappear permanently to keep you safe. Isabella's breath caught. The business trip, she whispered. The one where he died. Ethan nodded solemnly. He wasn't on a business trip, was he, Mum? The final paragraphs of the letter confirmed her worst fears. If something happens to me, know that I was trying to negotiate a way to keep you both safe, while still being part of your lives. I was going to tell my brother the truth about our family, about Ethan. Zain has a good heart buried under all that anger. He just needs someone to remind him who he used to be, before our father poisoned him against love. Ethan, if you ever meet your Uncle Zain, give him this letter. Tell him that I forgave him for choosing our father's path, and that I hope someday he'll forgive himself. Tell him that you exist, that love won, even if I'm not there to see it. Isabella, my beautiful wife, I'm sorry for all the lies. But you and Ethan are the only truths that ever mattered to me. All my love now and always, Marcus Al-Malik, who chose to be Marcus Rodriguez for love. The apartment fell silent, except for the tick of their old wall clock. Isabella stared at the letter, feeling like her entire life had been rewritten in Marcus's careful script. Mom, Ethan said softly, what do we do now? Do I give the letter to Uncle Zain? Isabella thought about Zain's cruelty at the restaurant, his cold arrogance in the penthouse that morning, the man who had called her son a cripple, and worse. Could that heartless billionaire really be Marcus's twin brother? But then she remembered the empty spaces in Zain's family photos, the unused art supplies in his closet, the moments when his mask had slipped to reveal something broken underneath. I don't know, baby, she admitted. The Zain I've met doesn't seem like someone your father would want us to trust. But Mom, Ethan's voice carried wisdom far beyond his 9 years. Dad said Uncle Zain has a good heart buried under the anger, and you always taught me that hurt people hurt people. Maybe Uncle Zain is just really, really hurt. As Isabella tucked Ethan into bed that night, she made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Tomorrow she would watch Zain Al-Malik more carefully, not as a servant cleaning his home, but as someone trying to find traces of the brother Marcus had loved, despite everything. Marcus was right. If there was goodness buried beneath Zain's cruelty, then Ethan deserved to know his uncle. And maybe, just maybe, Zain deserved to know about the nephew whose existence might heal wounds he didn't even know he was carrying. But first, she needed to understand what had really happened to Marcus, and whether revealing the truth to Zain would save their family or destroy what little they had left. The next morning, Isabella entered Zain's penthouse with new eyes. Every detail now carried potential meaning. Was this the home of Marcus's twin brother, or just a cruel stranger who happened to share his DNA? Zain was on the phone when she arrived, pacing by the windows in an expensive grey suit. His Arabic was rapid and harsh, punctuated by what sounded like frustrated curses. Isabella pretended to focus on her cleaning, while straining to catch any words Marcus might have taught her during their marriage. La, ana mish ha bel keda, Zain snapped into the phone. No, I won't accept that. The phrase was one Marcus used to say when he was particularly upset about something. As Zain continued arguing, Isabella noticed something she'd missed yesterday. On his massive mahogany desk sat 2 coffee cups. One obviously his, expensive and barely touched, but beside it was a smaller cup, child-sized, with cartoon characters painted on the side. It looked completely out of place in the sterile luxury of the penthouse. When Zain ended his call with what sounded like a curse, he found Isabella staring at the cups. Problem? He asked coldly. No, sir. I was just... The small cup is cute. Do you have children? He held her breath, knowing she was overstepping boundaries. Something flickered across Zain's face, too quick to identify but definitely painful. No, he said flatly. I don't. But he didn't explain the cup, and Isabella noticed he carefully moved it away from her reach, as if it was something precious. As the morning progressed, Isabella began to see patterns she'd missed before. Family photos were everywhere. They told a strange story. In the earliest pictures, two identical boys played together, inseparable and laughing. As the photos progressed through the years, the boys grew apart, literally standing farther from each other, until finally, in the most recent photos, only Zain appeared. The missing twin was obvious once you knew to look for him. Slightly less formal poses, a warmer smile, eyes that held mischief instead of calculation. Marcus. Her Marcus. "You're staring again," Zain's voice cut through her thoughts. Isabella jumped, realizing she'd been studying a family photo for several minutes. In it, teenage Zain and Marcus stood with their parents at what looked like a graduation ceremony. Marcus's arm was around Zain's shoulders, both boys grinning with identical smiles. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "It's just the other boy in these photos. He looks exactly like you." Zain's expression hardened to stone. Past tense. "He's dead." The raw pain in those three words hit Isabella like a physical blow. This wasn't the casual dismissal of a distant relative. This was grief, deep and still bleeding. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly, meaning it completely. "Loss?" Zain laughed, but it was hollow. "You can't lose something that chose to abandon you. My brother decided his new American life was more important than his family. He cut us out completely, changed his name, disappeared. For all I know, he died alone and forgotten, exactly as he chose to live." Isabella's heart clenched. If only Zain knew the truth, that Marcus had thought about his twin every day, that he died trying to find a way back to his family while protecting the new one he'd built. Maybe he had reasons, she suggested carefully. Maybe he was trying to protect people he loved. Zain's eyes flashed dangerously. Protect them from what? From wealth? From power? From family who would have given him anything? His voice rose with each word. No, he protected himself from responsibility, from duty, from the inconvenient truth that love is a luxury that destroys everything it touches. The last sentence came out as barely a whisper, and Isabella realized she was seeing the source of Zain's cruelty. Someone had convinced him that love was weakness, that family was burden, that connection meant destruction. "That's not true," she said before she could stop herself. "Love doesn't destroy, it builds, it heals, it what?" Zain stepped closer, his dark eyes boring into hers. "It creates happy families. It did such a wonderful job for you, didn't it? Your husband is dead, your son is disabled, and you're cleaning strangers' homes to survive. Tell me again how love saved you." The words were like daggers, each one finding its mark. But instead of breaking Isabella, they revealed something crucial. Zain wasn't just cruel. He was terrified. Terrified of the same vulnerabilities that had destroyed his brother, that had left his own life empty of everything except money and power. "Love didn't save me," Isabella said quietly, "but it gave me something worth saving. My son knows he's loved no matter what happens to us. Can you say the same?" For a moment, Zain looked like she'd slapped him. His carefully constructed mask cracked, revealing something young and wounded underneath. But just as quickly the walls went back up. "Clean the study next," he said coldly, turning away, "and don't touch anything on the desk." But as Isabella worked in his study, he discovered why he didn't want her touching his desk. Hidden beneath business documents and financial reports were children's drawings, dozens of them, crayon sketches of cars and houses, stick figures labeled Uncle Z, and one that made her breath catch, family portrait showing a man, woman and child in a wheelchair, with "Happy Family" written in careful block letters across the top. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, was a name, Ethan Rodriguez. Zain had been watching them. Somehow, he'd been keeping track of Ethan, collecting his artwork, maybe even caring. The sound of footsteps made her quickly cover the drawings, but not before she noticed one more detail that changed everything. Mixed in with Ethan's artwork were older drawings, yellowed with age, signed Marcus and Zain, age 8, in faded crayon. Zain had kept his brother's childhood art for over 20 years. As Isabella prepared to leave that day, she made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. Tomorrow, she would tell Ethan what she'd discovered, and tomorrow she would bring Marcus's letter to work, ready to give Zain the truth he didn't know he desperately needed. But first, he needed to prepare for the possibility that revealing Marcus's secret might unleash something in Zain that none of them were ready to handle. Isabella spent the night staring at Marcus's letter, reading it over and over until she had memorized every word. By dawn, he had made her decision. Today she would tell Zain the truth about his brother, about his nephew, about the family he thought he'd lost forever. But when she arrived at the penthouse that morning, He found Zain in a state she'd never seen before. He sat on his leather couch, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by empty whiskey glasses and what looked like every family photo he owned. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Sir?" Isabella approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" Zain looked up at her with an expression of such raw pain that she almost stepped back. "Do you know what today is?" Isabella shook her head. "It's the anniversary," Zain said quietly. 3 years ago today, I got the call that my brother was dead. Car accident in some nowhere town in Arizona. Alone. No family. No funeral. Just gone." Isabella's heart clenched. Marcus had died 3 years ago, but not in Arizona. He'd died right here in Miami, in a hospital just 20 minutes away, with Isabella holding his hand and Ethan sleeping in the chair beside his bed. "They said he was traveling under a false name," Zain continued, his voice breaking. "Marcus Rodriguez. As if our family name was so shameful he had to pretend to be someone else even in death." The irony was devastating. Zain had mourned his brother for 3 years, believing Marcus had died alone and forgotten, while Isabella had mourned her husband, never knowing he had family who would have loved to grieve with her. "I keep thinking," Zain whispered, staring at a photo of him and Marcus as children. "What if I had tried harder to find him? What if I had swallowed my pride and searched for him instead of waiting for him to come home?" Isabella's hand moved instinctively to the letter in her pocket. The moment had come sooner than she'd expected, but Zain's raw grief made the decision easy. "Mr. Al-Malik," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you about your brother." Zain's head snapped up, his dark eyes focusing on her with laser intensity. "What do you mean?" Isabella pulled out the letter with shaking hands. "Your brother didn't die alone, and he didn't forget you. He took a deep breath. "He was my husband. Marcus Rodriguez was Marcus Al-Malik." The silence that followed was deafening. Zain stared at the letter in her hands as if it were a venomous snake. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Marcus would never. You're just some waitress, some—" He stopped, realization dawning in his eyes. The boy in the wheelchair. "Ethan is your nephew," Isabella confirmed. "Your brother's son. Marcus left this letter for him, with instructions to give it to you if they ever met." Zain stood slowly, his entire body trembling. "Let me see it." Isabella handed him the letter, watching as he recognized his twin's handwriting immediately. His hands shook as he read, his face cycling through disbelief, pain, rage, and something that might have been hope. When he finished reading, Zain crumpled the letter against his chest and let out a sound that was half sob, half roar of anguish. "He was here," Zain gasped. "All this time he was here in Miami, and I never knew. He had a son, a family, a life, and I—" The words dissolved into broken Arabic, phrases Isabella couldn't understand but recognized as pure grief. "He wanted to tell you," Isabella said through her own tears. "The letter says he was trying to find a way to bring you back into his life. He loved you, Zain. He never stopped loving you." Zain looked up at her with eyes full of devastation. "And I called his son a cripple. I humiliated you both in public. He buried his face in his hands. What kind of monster am I?" For the first time since she'd met him, Isabella saw Zain not as a cruel billionaire, but as a broken man who had spent years building walls to protect himself from the very love he craved most. "You're Marcus's brother," she said simply, "and that means your family." The words seemed to shatter something fundamental inside Zain. He collapsed back onto the couch, the letter clutched in his hands like a lifeline. "I have to meet him," Zain said suddenly, urgently. "Ethan, I have to see my brother's son. I have to tell him. I have to apologize for—" He looked up at Isabella with desperate eyes. "Will he forgive me? After what I said, what I did?" Isabella thought about her son's wise words. Hurt people hurt people. Ethan had already understood what she was just beginning to see, that Zain's cruelty came from his own deep wounds. "Ethan has been carrying your brother's letter for 3 years, he said softly, "waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I think he's been hoping to find his uncle all along." Zain wiped his eyes, trying to compose himself but failing completely. "I don't know how to be an uncle. I don't know how to be anything except—" He gestured around the cold, perfect penthouse. "Except this. Marcus learned how to be a father," Isabella said. "Maybe you can learn too." As she prepared to leave that morning, Zain caught her arm gently, the first time he'd ever touched her without cruelty. "Isabella," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice now, respectful instead of dismissive. Would you bring Ethan here tomorrow? I want to meet my nephew properly. I want to tell him about his father, about the brother I lost and found again through him." Isabella nodded, seeing Marcus's goodness finally emerging from beneath years of protective ice. But as the elevator carried her away from Zain's penthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over. There were still secrets hiding in the shadows, still questions about Marcus's death that didn't quite add up. And somewhere in the Al-Malik family empire, there were people who might not be happy to learn that Marcus's American family was still alive, and that Zain was about to bring them into a world they'd never imagined. The next afternoon, Isabella stood outside Zain's building with Ethan, both of them nervous for completely different reasons. Ethan clutched a small wrapped package, one of his drawings, carefully prepared as a gift for the uncle he'd never met but always known existed. "Mom, what if he's still mean?" Ethan asked, his young voice betraying the anxiety he'd been hiding all morning. "Then we leave," Isabella promised, "but I think you're going to see a very different side of him today." The elevator ride felt eternal. When the doors opened, they found Zain waiting in his foyer, but he was transformed. Gone was the arrogant billionaire in expensive suits. Instead, he wore simple jeans and a white button-down shirt, his hair less perfectly styled, his entire posture somehow softer. When Zain saw Ethan, he dropped to his knees immediately, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. The gesture was so unexpected, so humble, that Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "Ethan," Zain said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you the biggest apology anyone has ever owed anyone. What I said at the restaurant was unforgivable. I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you, and I took that anger out on someone who didn't deserve it." Ethan studied his uncle's face with the serious intensity only children possess. "Dad always said that when people are mean, it's because they're hurting inside. Are you hurting, Uncle Zain?" The simple question broke something in Zain that had been carefully constructed over years of loneliness. "Yes," he whispered. "I've been hurting for a very long time." Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out Marcus's letter, now worn soft from 3 years of handling. "Dad left this for you. He said to give it to you when I found you, and to tell you that he forgave you, and hoped you'd forgive yourself." Zain took the letter with trembling hands, even though he'd already read it yesterday. But receiving it directly from Ethan felt like a benediction, a final message of love from the brother he thought he'd lost forever. "I have something for you, too," Ethan said shyly, holding out his wrapped package. "It's not very good, but I made it myself." Inside was a drawing that took Zain's breath away. It showed 2 men who looked exactly alike, standing together under a bright sun, with a small boy in a wheelchair between them. At the top, in careful block letters, Ethan had written, "My family." "You drew your dad and me together," Zain observed, his voice wondering. "I always knew you existed," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Dad used to talk in his sleep sometimes, calling your name. And when I saw you at the restaurant, even though you were being mean, you had Dad's eyes when you thought no one was looking." Isabella watched in amazement as Zain carefully studied every detail of Ethan's artwork, treating it like a priceless masterpiece. "Would you like to see some pictures of your dad when he was your age?" Zain asked. "I have photo albums going back to when we were babies." For the next hour, Zain transformed from the cold businessman Isabella knew into a devoted uncle, showing Ethan photo after photo of Marcus. He told stories of their childhood adventures, their shared dreams, the way they used to finish each other's sentences and play elaborate pranks on their tutors. "We were inseparable until we turned 18, Zain explained, showing Ethan a photo of the twins at their graduation. "That's when our father started grooming us to take over different parts of the family business. He said twins were too close, that we needed to learn independence." "What happened then?" Ethan asked, sensing there was more to the story. Zain's expression darkened slightly. "Our father believed that love made people weak. He started pitting us against each other, making us compete for his approval. Slowly, Marcus began pulling away from the family business, from me. I thought he was choosing freedom over responsibility, but now I think he was just choosing love over fear." Isabella noticed how Zain's hands clenched when he spoke about his father, and she began to understand the source of his emotional walls. "Uncle Zain," Ethan said suddenly, "do you want to see my room? Mom says we might have to move soon, but right now, I have my own space with all my art stuff." The innocent invitation seemed to mean everything to Zain. "I would love that more than anything." As they prepared to leave for Isabella and Ethan's apartment, Zain's phone rang. The caller ID showed "father" in Arabic script. Zain's entire demeanor changed, his shoulders tensing as he answered. The conversation was brief and harsh, conducted entirely in Arabic, but Isabella could tell from Zain's increasingly strained responses that he was being pressured about something. When he hung up, his face was pale. "Is everything okay?" Isabella asked. "My father wants me to attend a family dinner tonight. Command performance. Zain looked at Ethan with genuine regret. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Family business. Will you tell them about me? Ethan asked hopefully. Zain hesitated, and in that hesitation, Isabella saw the scared boy he must have been, still seeking approval from a father who used love as a weapon. Someday, Zain promised, when the time is right. But as they rode the elevator down, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that Zain's family would never think the time was right for acknowledging Marcus's American son. And if the Al-Maliks were anything like the controlling patriarch Zain described, they might do whatever it took to keep their family pure. That evening, as Isabella tucked Ethan into bed, he asked the question she'd been dreading. Mom, Uncle Zain seemed sad when his father called. Do you think his family will want to meet me? Isabella thought about the wealth and power the Al-Maliks represented, about the kind of people who could convince a son that love was weakness. I don't know, baby, he admitted, but I know Uncle Zain loves you already. Sometimes that has to be enough. As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Isabella stared out their small apartment window at the glittering lights of Miami's wealthy district, where Zain was probably sitting through a dinner designed to remind him of his proper place in the world. He had the sinking feeling that their brief moment of family happiness was about to be tested by forces much more powerful and dangerous than Zain's personal demons. Across the city, in the Al-Malik family compound, Zain sat through 3 hours of his father's lectures about duty, legacy, and the dangers of emotional attachment. But for the first time in his life, he found himself thinking about something more important than his father's approval. He was thinking about a brave little boy who had carried his father's final message for 3 years, waiting patiently for the uncle he'd never met to find his way home to love. The next morning brought a crisis that would test every fragile bond they'd just begun to build. Isabella arrived at work to find Zain's penthouse filled with men in expensive suits, all speaking rapid Arabic and studying documents spread across his dining room table. The tension in the room was palpable, and Zain looked like he hadn't slept at all. Pack everything, one of the men said to Zain in accented English. The Dubai office needs you immediately. This American phase of yours ends today. Isabella realized with growing horror that these weren't just business associates. They were family members, and they were here to take Zain away from the nephew he'd just discovered. The war for Ethan's only remaining family was about to begin, and Isabella wasn't sure any of them were prepared for the battle ahead. When Zain's eyes met hers across the room, she saw desperation there, and something else, a silent plea for help that reminded her heartbreakingly of Marcus in his final days, when he'd been trying to protect them from forces he couldn't control. History, it seemed, was about to repeat itself, unless they could find a way to break the cycle of fear and control that had already cost them so much. Isabella quietly retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding as she overheard fragments of heated Arabic conversation. She didn't need to understand the language to grasp the situation. Zain was being ordered to abandon his newfound family and return to the fold, just as Marcus had been pressured years before. But this time would be different. This time, she wouldn't let the Al-Malik family destroy another chance at love without a fight. The battle lines were drawn, and Ethan's future and Zain's soul hung in the balance. Isabella found herself cleaning the same counter for the 3rd time, her mind racing as the Arabic voices in the dining room grew more heated. Through the service window, she could see Zain's face growing paler with each exchange, his father's representatives closing in like wolves sensing weakness. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Ethan's name, spoken with unmistakable contempt by one of the men. They knew about him. Somehow, they already knew about Marcus's son. Zain's voice rose sharply in response. The first time she'd heard him truly argue with his family's emissaries. Whatever he was saying, it was making them angry. One man slammed his hand on the table, sending papers scattering. Isabella made a decision that terrified her. Quietly, she pulled out her phone and sent a text to her neighbor. Pick up Ethan from school today. Take him to your apartment and don't let anyone in until you hear from me. If the Al-Maliks were anything like the family Marcus had described in his letter, controlling, ruthless, willing to eliminate threats to their power, then Ethan might be in more danger than any of them had realized. The conversation in the dining room suddenly stopped. Isabella looked up to see all the men staring at her through the service window, their expressions ranging from dismissive to calculating. Zain, his father's representative said in careful English, "Is this the woman?" Question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Isabella realized that they hadn't just come to retrieve Zain, they'd come to evaluate the threat she and Ethan represented to their family's carefully controlled image. Zain's answer would determine everything that happened next, and Isabella could see the war raging behind his eyes, love for his newfound family battling a lifetime of conditioning to obey his father's will. The next few seconds would change all their lives forever, and Isabella could only stand there, frozen, as the most powerful family in the Middle East decided whether she and Ethan were assets to be acquired or problems to be eliminated. What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. Zain looked directly at Isabella, and in that moment, she saw him make the same choice his brother had made years before, the choice to protect love over power, family over fear. Yes, Zain said clearly, his voice carrying across the penthouse like a declaration of war. This is my family. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The men erupted in angry Arabic, voices overlapping in what sounded like threats and ultimatums. But Zain stood his ground, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face, drawing strength from the connection they'd built through grief and hope. Enough! The voice that cut through the chaos belonged to the eldest man present, clearly the leader of this delegation. He switched to English, his accent thick but his words precisely chosen. Zain, you forget yourself. This attachment ends now. You will return to Dubai, fulfill your obligations to the family, and forget this American distraction. Her name is Isabella, Zain said quietly, and her son is my nephew, my brother's child. Marcus chose his path, the man replied coldly. He died as he lived, separate from family, separate from duty. You will not make the same mistake. Isabella felt ice in her veins as she realized the truth. These people hadn't just disapproved of Marcus's choices, they had actively worked to keep him isolated, alone, cut off from the support that might have saved him. You killed him, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Maybe not directly, but you killed him by cutting him off from everyone who loved him. The room fell silent, the elder man's eyes fixed on Isabella with reptilian coldness. Careful, woman, you speak of things you don't understand. But Isabella was past caring about caution. 3 years of grief and struggle had taught her that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. I understand perfectly, she said, stepping into the dining room, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. You're here to do to Zain what you did to Marcus. Isolate him, control him, make him choose between family love and family duty. But there's one thing you don't know. She pulled out her phone and showed them the photo Ethan had sent her earlier, a drawing of his family tree, with Marcus and Zain at the top, connected to Ethan at the bottom, and the words Al-Malik Legacy, written in a child's careful handwriting. That little boy knows exactly who he is, Isabella continued. He knows his father's real name, his family's history, and his own heritage. If something happens to Zain, if he mysteriously disappears back to Dubai, Ethan will know why. And he'll grow up knowing that his family chose power over love, just like they did with his father. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Ethan represented the next generation of Al-Maliks, and children had a way of growing up with long memories and their own ideas about justice. Zain stared at Isabella with something approaching awe. He had just challenged one of the most powerful families in the world, using nothing but a 9-year-old's artwork and a mother's fierce determination. The elder man studied the phone screen for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You have 1 week, Zain. Resolve this situation and return home, or we will resolve it for you. The men filed out without another word, leaving Zain and Isabella alone in the suddenly too quiet penthouse. Isabella, Zain said, his voice shaking, do you have any idea what you just did? I protected my son, he replied simply. The way Marcus would have if he'd been stronger than his fear of them. Zain walked to the window, staring out at the Miami skyline. They won't give up. My father doesn't accept defiance, especially not from women he considers beneath his notice. Then we need to make sure they can't separate us, Isabella said. All of us. You, me, and Ethan. How? Isabella thought about Marcus's letter, about the love that had driven him to sacrifice everything for his family's safety, about Ethan's unwavering belief that family meant never giving up on each other. By becoming the kind of family they can't break apart, she said. By making sure Ethan knows he's not just loved, but protected. By showing your father that some things are worth fighting for. Zain turned from the window, and Isabella saw determination replacing fear in his dark eyes. Then we'd better get started, he said, because we only have a week to build something strong enough to survive whatever they're planning. As Isabella prepared to leave that afternoon, she realized that their story had just shifted from reunion to revolution. The stakes were higher now, the dangers more real. But for the first time since Marcus's death, she felt like she wasn't facing the world alone. The Al-Malik family had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the power of a mother's love and an uncle's newfound devotion. Now they would learn what Marcus had always known, that family wasn't about blood or duty or tradition. Family was about choosing to fight for each other, no matter the cost. But as Isabella walked through the lobby of Zain's building, she noticed something that made her steps falter. A man in a dark suit stood by the entrance, speaking quietly into a phone while watching everyone who passed. His eyes followed her with professional interest, and she realized with growing alarm that the Al-Maliks weren't planning to wait a week. The surveillance had already begun, and their fight for family was about to become a fight for survival. She pulled out her phone to warn Zain, but the call went straight to voicemail. Somewhere behind her, footsteps echoed hers, maintaining a careful distance but matching her pace exactly. Isabella quickened her walk toward the bus stop, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to get to Ethan, needed to make sure he was safe, needed to warn Zain that his family's patience had run out faster than any of them had anticipated. The game had changed, and the rules were about to become much more dangerous. As the bus pulled away from Zain's district, Isabella caught a glimpse of the man in the dark suit, speaking into his phone again, his eyes never leaving the vehicle, carrying her toward what she hoped was safety. But in a city where the Al-Maliks had resources she couldn't imagine, Isabella was beginning to realize that nowhere might be safe enough to hide a little boy who represented everything his grandfather's generation had tried to leave behind. The week of grace had just become a race against time, and Isabella wasn't sure they were fast enough to win. That evening, as Isabella triple-checked the locks on their apartment door, Ethan asked the question she'd been dreading. "Mom, why do you look scared? Did something happen with Uncle Zain?" Isabella knelt beside his wheelchair, looking into eyes that held too much wisdom for a 9-year-old face. "Baby, how would you feel about taking a little trip, just for a few days until Uncle Zain sorts some things out with his family?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "They don't want him to know us, do they? Just like with Dad." The insight broke Isabella's heart. "Some families have a hard time with change," she said carefully, "but Uncle Zain is fighting for us, just like your dad did. And just like Dad, they might try to make him choose," Ethan said quietly. "But Mom, I have an idea. What if we don't run this time? What if we help Uncle Zain fight?" Before Isabella could ask what he meant, Ethan was already wheeling toward his desk, pulling out a notebook filled with his careful observations and drawings. "I've been keeping track," he explained. "Every time Dad got sad, every story he told me about his family, every nightmare where he called Uncle Zain's name. I wrote it all down, drew pictures of everything. Mom, what if the Al-Maliks aren't as powerful as they think? What if they're just scared of losing the only family they have left?" Looking at her son's detailed notes, Isabella realized that Ethan had been preparing for this confrontation his entire life, collecting ammunition made of love and memory instead of money and threats. Maybe it was time to stop running from the Al-Malik legacy and start claiming it instead. The war for their family was about to begin, but this time they had weapons the other side couldn't anticipate. Truth, love, and a little boy who understood better than anyone that the strongest families were built on choice, not control. Isabella picked up her phone and dialed Zain's number, ready to tell him that his week of grace was about to become their moment of truth. It was time to stop being afraid of the Al-Malik name and start making it mean something worthy of Marcus's sacrifice. The real battle was just beginning, and for the first time Isabella believed they might actually have a chance to win. Zain answered on the first ring, his voice tense with worry. "Isabella, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. My security team picked up chatter that my father's people are planning something. You and Ethan need to disappear for a while." "No," Isabella said firmly. "No more disappearing. No more hiding. It didn't save Marcus, and it won't save us." "Isabella, you don't understand what these people are capable of." "Then tell me," she interrupted. "Tell me everything, because Ethan has spent 3 years documenting his father's stories, and we think we know more about your family's secrets than you realize." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Zain spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more dangerous. "Meet me at the children's hospital on Brickell, the cancer ward. There's something I need to show you about why my father really wants me back in Dubai, and why Marcus's son represents a threat they can't afford to ignore." As Isabella prepared to leave with Ethan, she felt the familiar chill of approaching revelation. Every time she thought she understood the scope of the Al-Malik family's secrets, another layer peeled back to reveal something even more complex underneath. But this time, instead of feeling overwhelmed by forces beyond her control, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced since Marcus's death, the fierce certainty that came with having nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The Al-Maliks had made the mistake of threatening her child. Now they were about to learn what happened when a mother stopped running and started hunting. The final confrontation was approaching, and Isabella intended to make sure that when it was over, Ethan would know exactly who he was and where he belonged, not as a victim of family power games, but as a beloved son who had fought for and won his place in the world. The hospital meeting would change everything, but this time Isabella was ready for whatever truth was waiting in the shadows. Brickell Children's Hospital at midnight felt like something from a dream. Sterile hallways lit by emergency lighting, the soft beep of machines providing a steady rhythm to their footsteps. Zain met them at a side entrance, his face grim as he led them through corridors that seemed familiar to him. "Why here?" Isabella asked, pushing Ethan's wheelchair as they followed Zain deeper into the hospital. "Because this is where it all started," Zain replied, "and where it has to end." They stopped in front of a door marked Private Al-Malik Pediatric Wing. Isabella's breath caught as she realized they were standing in front of an entire hospital wing bearing Zain's family name. "The Al-Malik Foundation built this wing 15 years ago," Zain explained, using a keycard to open the door. "After my younger sister died of leukemia. She was 8 years old." Inside, the walls were covered with photos of children, some smiling in hospital beds, others playing in specially designed therapy rooms, many more than Isabella had expected to see in a pediatric cancer ward. "Her name was Amira," Zain continued, stopping in front of a large portrait of a beautiful little girl with dark hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. "She was Marcus's favorite. When she got sick, he wanted to quit everything and stay by her side. My father forbade it, said business couldn't stop for personal feelings." Isabella felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. That's when Marcus started pulling away from the family. Marcus spent every free moment here with Amira. He read to her, played games, brought her art supplies. He loved to draw, just like... Zain's voice trailed off as he looked at Ethan. "Just like me," Ethan said quietly. "Dad used to tell me about a little girl who loved to draw. He never said she was his sister." Zain knelt beside Ethan's wheelchair. "He would have loved you. He would have understood what it meant to be brave when your body doesn't work the way other people's do." "What happened to her?" Ethan asked. "She died while Marcus was away on a business trip our father forced him to take. Marcus never forgave himself for not being there, and he never forgave our father for prioritizing business over family." Zain's hands clenched into fists. "That's when Marcus started making his escape plans. He couldn't save Amira, but he could save himself from becoming the kind of man who would sacrifice love for duty." Isabella began to understand the depth of trauma that had shaped both brothers. "And now, your father sees Ethan as what? Another threat to family control?" "Worse," Zain said grimly. "He sees Ethan as proof that Marcus's defiance produced something beautiful. A grandchild who exists outside the family's control, who represents everything they tried to suppress." They walked through the wing, past therapy rooms, and play areas that had been designed with infinite care for children facing impossible battles. At the end of the hall, Zain stopped at a room that was different from the others, larger, filled with art supplies and natural light. "This was Amira's room," he said. "Marcus had it converted into an art therapy studio after she died. It's where sick children come to create beauty in the middle of their darkest moments." Ethan wheeled himself to the center of the room, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's perfect," he breathed. "Dad would have loved this." "He did," Zain said softly. "This was his last gift to Amira, and his first act of rebellion against our father. He funded the entire renovation without permission, then dared our father to shut it down, and explained to the media why the Al-Malik Foundation was taking art supplies away from dying children." Isabella realized they were standing at the heart of everything, the place where Marcus had first chosen love over fear, where he'd learned that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the consequences. "Your father wants you back in Dubai because he's losing control of the family narrative," he said, understanding flooding through her. "First, Marcus escaped and created a life of love. Now you're following the same path. If Ethan exists, if he thrives, he grows up knowing he's an Al-Malik who was chosen and cherished. What does that say about the family's legacy?" Zain nodded grimly. "It says that love is stronger than control. That family can be built instead of just inherited. That maybe our father's iron grip on everyone's lives isn't necessary after all." "So what's the plan?" Isabella asked. "Because I'm done running, and I won't let them erase Ethan the way they tried to erase Marcus." Zain walked to the window overlooking the city, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Tomorrow morning my father arrives in Miami. He's coming to personally oversee my return to Dubai and the resolution of the Marcus situation." "What kind of resolution?" Isabella's voice was tight with fear. "The kind where accidents happen to people who know too much about family business," Zain said quietly. The kind where a disabled child and his mother might tragically disappear, while the grieving uncle bravely returns to fulfill his duties. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, but instead of terror, Isabella felt something else rising in her chest, fury so pure and bright it felt like lightning. Then we make sure he never gets the chance, she said. Ethan had been quietly listening to everything, his young face serious as he processed the adult complexities of family power and dangerous love. Now he spoke up, his voice carrying surprising strength. Uncle Zain, if great-grandfather Al-Malik is coming here, that means he's leaving his safe place too, right? That means he's vulnerable, just like us. Both adults turned to stare at the 9-year-old who had just identified the flaw in a billionaire's armor. What are you thinking, baby? Isabella asked. Ethan smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like Marcus at his most mischievous. I'm thinking that great-grandfather doesn't know about this place, about what Dad built here. I'm thinking he doesn't know that there are hundreds of families in Miami who love the Al-Malik name because of what it's done for their sick children. Understanding dawned on Zain's face. The foundation. The families we've helped, the media attention, the public record of everything Marcus built in Amira's memory. If great-grandfather tries to hurt us, Ethan continued, he's not just hurting some random American family, he's hurting the people his own foundation was created to protect. And if that story gets out, it destroys everything, Isabella finished. The Al-Malik reputation, their business relationships, their carefully constructed image as benevolent philanthropists. For the first time since this nightmare began, Zain smiled, not the cruel expression Isabella had first encountered, but something warm and genuinely hopeful. Marcus would be so proud, he said, looking at Ethan with wonder. You have his strategic mind and his good heart. So we fight? Isabella asked. We fight, Zain confirmed, but not the way my father expects. We fight with truth, with love, with the legacy Marcus actually left behind. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation with the Al-Malik patriarch, but tonight, in a room dedicated to helping children create beauty in the face of impossible odds, they had found their battle plan. They would fight for family the way Marcus had taught them, not with money or power or threats, but with the revolutionary idea that love was stronger than fear, and that the best families were built on choice rather than control. The war was far from over, but for the first time Isabella believed they might actually win. And even if they didn't, Ethan would grow up knowing that his family had fought for him with everything they had, that he was worth every risk they'd taken and every sacrifice they'd made. That knowledge alone would be victory enough. The next morning arrived grey and stormy, as if Miami itself was preparing for battle. Isabella had spent the sleepless night preparing Ethan for what was to come, while Zain had used his resources to set their plan in motion. At 10 a.m. sharp, a convoy of black Mercedes vehicles pulled up to the Al-Malik Foundation's Miami headquarters. From their vantage point in the building's coffee shop across the street, Isabella watched as Khalil Al-Malik emerged from the lead car. Even at 70, Marcus and Zain's father commanded attention like a force of nature. All silver-haired and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Isabella made in a year, he moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to reshaping the world to his will. He looks just like Dad, Ethan observed quietly, studying his great-grandfather through the coffee shop window. But sadder, lonelier. Isabella marveled at her son's ability to see humanity, even in someone who posed a direct threat to their lives. But as she watched Khalil Al-Malik stride toward the building, surrounded by bodyguards and assistants, he saw only danger. Remember the plan, Zain said into his phone, speaking to the contacts he'd spent all night cultivating. Everything has to happen exactly on schedule. At 10:15, Khalil entered the building expecting to find his wayward son waiting submissively for orders to return home. Instead, he found the building's main conference room filled with people he hadn't expected to see. Families whose children had been treated in the Al-Malik pediatric wing, local media outlets, and representatives from every major charity in Miami. At the head of the table sat Zain, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was Isabella, and next to her was Ethan in his wheelchair, no longer trying to hide, but sitting proudly in full view of everyone present. "Father," Zain said calmly as Khalil entered the room, his bodyguards confused by the crowd of witnesses. "I'd like you to meet your grandson." The room fell silent as Khalil's eyes fixed on Ethan. Isabella watched the old man's face cycle through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been recognition. "This is highly inappropriate," Khalil said finally, his accent making the words sound even more disapproving. A family matter should not be conducted in public. Family matters should definitely be public, said Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric oncologist who ran the Al-Malik wing, especially when that family has done so much good for our community. She gestured to the families surrounding them. Mr. Al-Malik, these are just a few of the hundreds of families who have been helped by your son Marcus's vision. The art therapy program he created has been featured in medical journals worldwide. The Al-Malik Foundation's work here in Miami has become a model for pediatric care across the country. Khalil's eyes narrowed as he began to understand what was happening. Marcus is dead, said coldly. Whatever he built here died with him. Actually, said Jennifer Martinez from the Miami Herald, her recorder clearly visible on the table, we're here to discuss the expansion of Marcus Al-Malik's programs. His son Ethan has inherited his artistic talents, and there's tremendous community support for establishing a new initiative in his honor. Isabella watched Khalil's face as the trap closed around him. Every person in the room was connected to the positive legacy Marcus had built, and every one of them saw Ethan not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a treasure to be protected. Furthermore, Dr. Chen continued, we understand that Ethan's uncle Zain has decided to remain in Miami permanently to oversee the expansion personally. The Board of Trustees is thrilled to have another Al-Malik family member dedicating their life to this vital work. The genius of their plan was becoming clear. Khalil couldn't order the elimination of Isabella and Ethan without destroying the very public image the Al-Malik Foundation depended on. And he couldn't drag Zain back to Dubai without abandoning the charitable work that had made their family name synonymous with healing rather than just wealth. This is manipulation, Khalil said quietly, but Isabella could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. This is family, Ethan said, speaking for the first time since his great-grandfather had entered the room. His clear, young voice carried across the conference room with surprising strength. Dad always said that family isn't about control, it's about taking care of each other. Khalil stared at his grandson, and for a moment, Isabella saw something crack in the old man's armor. This wasn't just Marcus's son. This was a child who carried the Al-Malik strength and intelligence, but who had been shaped by love instead of fear. The boy is disabled, Khalil said, but his tone had shifted slightly. The boy is exceptional, said Mrs. Patterson, Ethan's teacher, who had been quietly invited to witness this confrontation. Ethan Rodriguez Al-Malik is one of the most gifted students I've ever taught. His artwork has been displayed in our school's gallery, and his essay about family courage won the district writing competition. Isabella noticed how Mrs. Patterson had seamlessly joined Ethan's last names, creating a bridge between his father's legacy and his uncle's protection. You have a choice, father, Zain said calmly. You can try to tear apart this family that Marcus died protecting, and in the process, destroy everything positive the Al-Malik name has come to represent in America. Or you can accept that love made us stronger, not weaker. The Foundation's work here generates millions in positive publicity, added Robert Chen from the Miami Business Journal. The Al-Malik family is seen as a model of using wealth responsibly. Any disruption to that narrative would be unfortunate. For business relationships worldwide, Khalil was trapped, and everyone in the room knew it. The very power structure he'd built to control his family was now protecting them from his control. But Isabella knew this man hadn't become one of the world's wealthiest people by accepting defeat gracefully. The question was whether he would choose to see Ethan as an asset to be managed or a threat to be neutralized. I want to speak with the boy, Khalil said finally. Alone. The room tensed. This wasn't part of their plan. That's not happening, Isabella said immediately. I am his great-grandfather, Khalil replied. I have certain rights. You have the right to meet him here, in front of people who care about him, Zain said firmly. You don't have the right to take him anywhere alone. For a long moment, grandfather and son stared at each other across the conference table, decades of control and rebellion playing out in their locked gazes. Finally, Khalil walked around the table and knelt beside Ethan's wheelchair, bringing himself to the child's eye level, just as Zain had done days before. You look like Marcus, he said quietly, and for the first time, his voice carried genuine emotion instead of calculated coldness. You have his eyes, his stubborn chin. Ethan studied his great-grandfather with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Mum says, I have Uncle Zain's eyes too. She says twins pass things down together, even when they're apart. Something flickered across Khalil's weathered face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. What else does your mother tell you about family? She says family is the people who choose to love you every day, not just the people who share your blood, Ethan replied simply. Dad chose to love her. Uncle Zain chose to love me. That makes us family. Isabella held her breath. This 9-year-old boy was having a philosophical debate about the nature of family with one of the world's most powerful men, and somehow holding his own. Khalil was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than Isabella had ever heard it. "Marcus wrote to me, you know, before he died. Letters I never answered." He glanced up at Isabella with something that might have been regret. "He wanted to tell me about you, about his wife, his son, his life in America." The room fell silent. Even the reporters stopped taking notes, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal. "Why didn't you answer?" Ethan asked, with the brutal honesty only children possessed. Khalil's hands, spotted with age but still strong, gripped the arms of his chair. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I acknowledged his happiness, I would have to admit that everything I taught my sons about strength and duty was wrong." "It's okay to be wrong sometimes," Ethan said gently. "Dad used to say that being wrong just means you get to learn something new." Isabella watched in amazement as her son, this brave, wise, beautiful child, began to heal wounds that had festered in the Al-Malik family for generations. "Ethan," Khalil said carefully, "would you like to know about your father when he was your age? About the things he loved before the world taught him to be afraid of loving?" "Yes, please," Ethan said eagerly. "Uncle Zain told me some stories, but I want to hear all of them." Khalil glanced around the room, suddenly seeming to remember they had an audience. His businessman's mask started to slide back into place, but Ethan reached out and touched his hand. "You don't have to be scary around me, great-grandpa," Ethan said. "I already know you're powerful and important, but I want to know if you're kind." The simple question shattered whatever remained of Khalil's defenses. Isabella saw tears gathering in the old man's eyes as he looked at this grandson who saw through all his armor to the lonely heart beneath. "I haven't been kind for a very long time," Khalil whispered. "I forgot how." "That's okay," Ethan said with infinite patience. "Uncle Zain forgot too, but he remembered when he met me. Maybe you can remember too." The conference room had become a therapy session, and everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing something profound, the moment when power chose to serve love instead of demanding that love serve power. Dr. Chen cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Al-Malik, Sr., the Foundation Board would be honored to have you tour the pediatric wing that bears your family's name. Your grandson's artwork is currently on display in the Children's Gallery." Khalil looked up, seeming to remember where he was and why he'd come. But instead of the cold calculation Isabella had expected, he saw genuine curiosity in his eyes. "You created art for the children?" he asked Ethan. "I created art with them," Ethan corrected. "We help each other make beautiful things, even when we're scared or hurting. Dad taught me that art is how we share our hearts with other people." "Marcus always loved to draw," Khalil said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I made him stop when he turned 12. I said it wasn't suitable for future business leaders." "Maybe you could start again too," Ethan suggested. "I could teach you. It's never too late to make beautiful things." Isabella realized that her son was offering his great-grandfather the same gift he'd tried to offer Zain in the restaurant, the chance to remember joy, to connect across pain, to choose creation over destruction. The difference was that now, surrounded by witnesses to Marcus's legacy of love, Khalil Al-Malik was finally ready to receive that gift. "I would like that very much," Khalil said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would like to learn how to make beautiful things again." Zain looked across the table at Isabella, and she saw relief and wonder in his eyes. They had won not through violence or manipulation, but through the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to let fear dictate their choices. "There's one more thing," Ethan said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Isabella's heart stopped as she realized what he was pulling out. Not Marcus's letter this time, but something else. A small, carefully wrapped package. "I made this for you," Ethan said, handing it to his great-grandfather. "Mom didn't know I was working on it, but I had a feeling I might meet you someday." Khalil unwrapped the package with trembling hands. Inside was a drawing that took his breath away, a family tree with deep roots and strong branches, showing all the Al-Maliks through the generations. But instead of ending with the current generation, the tree continued growing, with new branches labeled love, art, healing, and choice. At the very top of the tree, in Ethan's careful handwriting, were the words, "The Al-Malik Legacy, Building Beautiful Things Together." The old man stared at the drawing for a long moment, tears now flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered to his grandson. "Thank you for showing me what our family could become." As the meeting began to break up, with reporters scheduling follow-up interviews and Foundation representatives planning expansion meetings, Isabella found herself standing beside the man who had terrified her just hours before. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Khalil said formally, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Al-Malik, I owe you an apology that can never be adequate, and I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." "You don't owe me anything," Isabella replied. "But you owe Ethan a great-grandfather who chooses love over fear. You owe Zain a father who supports his happiness, and you owe Marcus's memory the chance to see his family healed instead of broken." Khalil nodded slowly. "It will take time, changing a lifetime of habits, rebuilding relationships that were damaged by years of distance and control. We have time," Isabella said simply. "Family isn't built in a day, but it starts with the decision to try." As they prepared to leave the building, Khalil made one final request. "Ethan," he said, "would you like to see where your father and uncle grew up? The Al-Malik compound has a beautiful art studio that hasn't been used in decades. Perhaps it's time to fill it with color again." Ethan looked up at his mother, his eyes shining with excitement and hope. "Can we, Mom? Can we go see Dad's house?" Isabella glanced at Zain, who nodded with a smile that reminded her heartbreakingly of Marcus. "Yes, baby," he said. "I think it's time we saw where your family comes from." As they walked out of the building together, 4 generations of Al-Maliks learning to be a family instead of just sharing a name, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced since Marcus died. Complete and utter peace. The war was over. Love had won. And for the first time in years, he could imagine a future filled with joy instead of just survival. 3 months later, Isabella stood in the garden of the Al-Malik compound in Coral Gables, watching Ethan teach his great-grandfather how to mix watercolors. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Khalil had discovered a patience he never knew he possessed, while Ethan had blossomed under the attention and resources his new family provided. "The blue needs to be lighter here," Ethan was saying, his small hand guiding Khalil's weathered one across the paper. "See how the sky gets paler near the horizon?" "Like this?" Khalil asked, his voice holding the wonder of someone discovering magic for the first time. "Perfect. Great-grandpa, you're really good at this." Isabella smiled as she watched them work. The art studio Khalil had mentioned was now filled with easels, supplies, and the laughter of 3 generations learning to create together. Zain had proven to be a surprisingly talented sculptor, channeling years of repressed emotion into beautiful bronze figures that now decorated the compound's gardens. "They look happy," Zain said, joining Isabella on the terrace with 2 cups of coffee. "They are happy," she agreed. "How did the board meeting go?" "Better than expected. The Miami expansion is approved, and Father has agreed to establish similar programs in Dubai and London. He wants Ethan to help design the children's areas when he's older." Zain paused, studying Isabella's face. "How do you feel about that? About Ethan being so connected to the family business?" Isabella considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, the idea of her son being involved with the Al-Malik empire would have terrified her. Now, watching Khalil and Ethan paint together in the afternoon sunlight, she saw opportunity instead of threat. "Marcus always said that good people could change bad systems from the inside," he said finally. "If Ethan grows up knowing he's loved, supported, and free to make his own choices, then maybe he'll be the one to help the Al-Malik name stand for something even better than it does now. And if he chooses something completely different, then we'll support that too. That's what family does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Khalil helped Ethan add finishing touches to their collaborative painting, a portrait of Marcus that somehow captured both his strength and his gentleness. "Isabella," Zain said suddenly, "there's something I need to tell you, something I've been thinking about for weeks." She turned to face him, noting the nervous energy in his posture. "What is it?" "Father has offered to make you the director of the Al-Malik Foundation's American operations. Full salary, benefits, decision-making authority over all our charitable programs in the United States." He paused. "It would mean financial security for you and Ethan, but it would also mean becoming an Al-Malik officially," Isabella finished. "Taking Marcus's name, joining the family business, making this real instead of just temporary sanctuary." "Yes, and I know it's a lot to consider, especially after everything you've been through. But Isabella, you've already transformed our family in ways I never thought possible. You helped Father remember how to love, helped me remember who I used to be before fear made me cruel. You gave us Ethan, and through him, you gave us hope." Isabella looked out at the garden where her son was teaching his great-grandfather to see beauty in the world again. She felt the last piece of her heart heal. "Marcus would want this," he said softly. "He would want Ethan to grow up knowing he belongs somewhere, surrounded by people who choose him every day." "Is that a yes?" Isabella smiled, thinking about the scared, angry billionaire who had once called her son terrible names, and the broken woman who had cleaned his penthouse while dreaming of escape. Neither of those people existed anymore. In their place were two people who had learned that the strongest families were built on forgiveness, choice, and the radical decision to love despite every reason to protect themselves instead. "Yes," he said. "Yes, it's a yes." From across the garden, Ethan's voice carried on the warm Miami breeze. "Mom, Uncle Zain, come see what great-grandpa and I made." As they walked toward the easel where Marcus's portrait smiled back at them, painted with 4 hands but 1 heart, Isabella realized that this was exactly the ending her husband would have written for them. Not perfect, not without challenges still to come, but real, honest, full of the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure instead of breaking apart. The Al-Malik family had finally learned what Marcus had always known, that wealth meant nothing without people to share it with, that power was useless unless it was used to protect the vulnerable, and that the greatest legacy anyone could leave was the knowledge that they had chosen love over fear, connection over control, and family over everything else that seemed important but ultimately wasn't. As Isabella took her place beside Ethan's wheelchair, with Zain's hand warm on her shoulder and Khalil's eyes bright with grandfatherly pride, she knew that Marcus was smiling down at them from whatever place good fathers go to watch their families grow. They had found their way home at last, not to a place but to each other, and that was the most beautiful thing of all.